everybody. Thanks for being here today. I'm Jody LaVoie, the founder of the Grief Company and Widows in the Workplace. I want to welcome you to Navigating Work and Grief Together, where we explore how grief and major life events like death, divorce, caring for ailing parents, leadership changes, and financial insecurity can affect both your work performance and your personal well-being. We will talk about strategies for managing these challenges and fostering a supportive workplace. Today, specifically, we're going to focus on grief and leadership and the impact that it has on employees' performance and potential. And I'm thrilled that my friend Anthony Casablanca is here with me today. And, fortunately, I love the power of LinkedIn and connections. We were introduced by a fellow friend and professional relationship, Barbara Best at Capstrat. So I'm happy she's a super connector and brought us together. So welcome, Anthony.
Well, Jody, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy you're here. Kicking us off here with navigating work and grief together. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about what led you to having this conversation with me today? A little bit about your professional background.
Right, sure. So I spent 31 years with a company called Hillenbrand Industries, and 28 of those years were on the casket side of their business, right? So they had a couple of businesses. One was Batesville Casket Company, the other one was Hillrom Hospital Equipment. I was on the Batesville Casket side, so spent a lot of time working in the death care industry. And my brother is actually a duly licensed funeral director, and he's now running 5 funeral homes up in the state of Minnesota. And back in 2017, 18, after I had retired, we sort of came together and said, you know what, there's a void in the leadership space around how do you handle grieving employees in the workplace? How do you not handle them? How do you lead them so that they can be successful and excel at work while they're grieving, right? And so we got some friends together, some associates, some colleagues, and 2 of them happened to be best-selling leadership book authors. And they were like, you know what? Nobody is talking about this. We've never seen this topic approached from the leadership side. You guys ought to write a book. And so that's what we did. And we launched a consulting company called Grief Leaders, which has expanded now from just grief and loss to employees go through this same process when change management is put in place, right? When change initiatives are launched. And so we're sort of we have sort of 2 platforms. One is sort of the grief side and the other is a change management side. And so yeah, between my leadership experience, I spent the last 12 years of my career in senior leadership roles, from the vice president of human resources to vice president of global manufacturing and logistics, and ultimately the last 3 years of my career as president of an operating company, all under the Hillenbrand umbrella. I dealt with this a lot in my time in leadership roles. Early in my career, I was the guy who had to go on the ground and deal with all of this when others made the decision that impacted people's lives. And then later in my career, I got to be the guy who made the decision and impacted people's lives. And boy, I was so thankful for those early formative experiences, because I was able to recognize what, by the stroke of a pen and by a few words, I was going to do to people's lives, which really changed the way I asked my organizations to lead people through those times, and actually lead people in general. Everything we're going to talk about today, you should already be doing. You shouldn't be waiting. So
thank you. Thanks, Anthony, for all of that. And you have such a breadth and depth of experience coming up, especially through HR
right.
and then moving into leadership. You've seen it all.
Right.
You've been on the front lines with
Right.
employees that are coming to you with stories, and
Right.
it's so impactful that you were able to then move into this leadership role and change the way you lead from all that you've learned.
Right.
So I'm thrilled that you're going to talk to everybody today about leadership and what it looks like and what it should ideally look like as it pertains to grief, because people don't talk much about grief in the workplace, do
Right.
they, Anthony?
No, no,
And
they do not. It's one of those, well, so it's, that it tends to lead to very uncomfortable, awkward, emotional conversations that most people don't want to go there, right? So either we don't even talk about it, or we go, "How you doing?" And the other person goes, "I'm fine." And you go, "Good. Okay, let's
yeah,
move on." Right? And that's absolutely the wrong way to deal with any of this.
absolutely. And I know you've researched and you've seen the data that's out there about productivity and that happens when people are grieving. And
Yeah.
reminder to everybody, grief isn't just death.
Right.
I know I said that at the beginning, but everybody originally goes to it's all about somebody who died, which is extremely important, but there are all these other major life events that impact performance and your personal life at home and all those are commingled. And so
Yeah.
addressing these at work where most people spend most of their time is truly an important step.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. COVID taught us a little bit about this, but not, I mean, it blurred the lines, right? It blurred the lines between home and work. Before COVID, it was sort of like, that's your personal life, check that at the door. Then COVID hit and everybody started working from home, and suddenly checking your personal problems at the door, you were sitting in your kitchen table or in your living room having conversations about work. You couldn't check it at the door because your kids were running around behind you and the dog was barking, and right. And so that helped a little bit. But we still didn't actually teach people how to have the conversations, and that's the problem.
Absolutely. And that's, you hit the nail right on the head there, Anthony. We don't know how to talk about grief.
Right.
And grief is a mental health issue.
Right.
And
Right.
and it's important to think about it also with that lens as well, because employees are all wanting, we all need additional layered mental health support. And so
Right.
this is yet another opportunity to do that.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit, Anthony, about how it pertains to, I know you shared your seven losses model from
Hmm.
McKinsey. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I think that's a good way
Sure,
to start.
sure. If you don't mind, I'll pull up the slides if that's good.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to be great for people to see the visual, so they'll
Sure,
really be able to follow through
sure,
each
sure.
of
So, yeah, so as Jody mentioned, um, well, I'm waiting for my slides to change.
them.
All right, that didn't work. Let's do this.
That is okay.
There we go. Okay. So so a couple of things as I set this up. Number one, there was an article written in 2020. The reference to it is in the bottom right-hand corner there, called McKinsey. The consulting group actually did some research and they discovered the seven losses, and they titled an article that the hidden perils of grief in the workplace. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned in the introduction. So, yes, grief is much broader than just the loss of a loved one. There are thousands of triggers, and many of those triggers can be work related. I will tell you that things like the statistics you see around burnout and lack of engagement, um, those things are symptoms. Those are symptoms of grief, right? When people become disengaged or they become burned out, those are symptoms of an employee who is actually grieving in the workplace. They go through the five stages of grief. They're typically stuck in anger or bargaining, right? Maybe depression. Uh, and it's these seven losses that they're grappling with, right? Something has changed in the work environment that has caused the disengagement, that has caused the burnout, that has caused them to grieve. And we've just made it way too easy to say, oh, well, Jody's burned out. That's her problem. Well, no, Jody's burned out because there's a problem in the work environment, right? And we need to
Absolutely.
understand what that is. And
And so many
so,
people, Anthony, before you go on too, uh, grief doesn't stop after a year. And
no,
that's
it does
the
not.
conception people have. Like, this loss happened a year ago. She should be over that by now. Come
Right,
on.
right.
And
We implemented that change months ago, years ago, right? Or, yeah, she lost her mother 3 years ago. What's the deal, right? Why is she still getting upset over that around this time every year, right?
Mhm.
And so the reason is because we as humans struggle with these seven things, right? When when change enters our lives, by the way, positive or negative, when change enters our lives, we begin to filter that change um, through these seven things, right? Because the change alters our perception of reality, and we have to try to rebuild a new reality around the new circumstances, right? And so those seven losses, you can see them here. I will not read all of this, but the loss of attachment, the loss of territory, right? So where do I belong? Who am I connected to? Structure, what's my role? Loss of identity, who am I? That's a big one, particularly in the loss of a loved one, right? If a spouse dies, if a child dies, if a sibling dies, you that is a real thing, right? Who am I now, right?
Right,
I
right.
built my life with this person, and now what, right? The loss of future. So where am I going? This one, again, big on the loss of a loved one, but also when you implement a change at work. So now what's my
Absolutely.
future, right?
And Anthony, you gave me a great example when we talked before this call about new leadership. Oh, there's a merger that's happening or an acquisition that's happening.
Right.
This whole question about future, and that happens very frequently.
It does. It does. And so I can tell you my last role, the last 3 years where I was a CEO, president of an operating global operating company, that was an acquired company within our portfolio, and they sent me in to go integrate them, basically, right? To run them and integrate them. And I will tell you, every person in that organization after the acquisition, and frankly, many on both sides, were struggling with all of these things,
Hmm.
right? On both sides of the equation, right?
Yeah,
The new president's gone. There's a new guy from corporate here, right? Who am I connected to? Where do we fit in this portfolio? Are they going to try to change our culture? Are we going to stay the way we are today? Right? What's my role? Is my role going away? That was a question on both sides, right? Because we had an accounting group in the corporate office. We have an accounting group in the acquired company. Is one of those going away? What's going to happen?
yeah.
Every single one of these was going through the minds of our people, and I can remember the day that I actually became president of that company. I had been appointed months before, but I was in an all employee meeting, and I don't actually recall the question that the person asked. But my response was, look, we were acquired because of the great company that we are, and I'm not going to let that change.
Mhm.
So we are going to comply with what is required from corporate, but we are not going to conform. And the line of people who wanted to talk to me after that meeting was like out the door. And they all said the same thing. You have no idea how much we needed to hear that. We're now we're ready. We're good. We're good.
Wow. I just want to focus on, say that again. Comply, not conform, right? Those
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
words.
So this was the acquired company, had a very strong culture, was an industry leader, global industry leader in their field. Um, Frankly, had a better culture than the parent company that I came from, right? Very people centric, very focused on doing the right thing. Um, and And what they needed to hear was, yeah, obviously we're going to have to comply, right? Because this was a private equity company. Now they were in a public company, so there was all kinds of reporting requirements and all kinds of things that were being heaped on them. And so they needed to hear, yeah, we're going to have to comply, no doubt, but we are not going to conform. We are not going to stop being who we are and what we do and why those things matter just because you now have something under your name that says a division of Hillenbrand, right? And they were like, okay, we're good. We're good.
Wow. Just that moment when you entered and said that. And I know there's a lot of leaders out there that are going through the same scenario. And so, what would you advise them to do? Where do you start with all of this?
Right, right. So, um, so when I was the VP of Human Resources at Batesville Casket Company, um, we had developed this framework that we used, and um, I think in the introduction I mentioned, if you're only going to use this framework during a change or to lead an individual individually when they're grieving, you're missing the point, right? It's not going to work. This needs to be a cultural shift that the organization takes on. And so there's three, think of it in terms of three circles, right? A genuine respect for people culture. That is a lot different than, oh yeah, we treat our people with dignity and respect because we have ethics hotlines and no harassment policies and those kinds of things. That's important, but
Mhm.
that's trying to governance your way to respect for people. The second circle is setting up an emotionally and psychologically safe environment where people are comfortable with raising their hand and saying, "Hey, I need help. I'm struggling. I disagree. I don't understand." Right. And the third one is what we've called adaptive leadership. And this is way too much to go into on a call. I mean, I could spend 8 hours on the adaptive leadership model, but suffice it to say that the adaptive leadership is moving from managing people uniformly, right? I
Mhm.
manage this way, get over it because I'm not changing. It's what I'm comfortable with, right? And shifting from that to leading individually. And leading individually says, hey, I'm not going to ask you to conform to me. I'm going to recognize that I need to lead people differently based on where they are in their career, in their assignment, in their personal lives, right? That requires a different leadership style or a different leadership approach based on where you are, right? And it also recognizes that you're going to move around, right? Because now you're in a new assignment and you're going through those seven struggles because things have changed and I may need to support you a little bit more than I did in the past, right? And so people constantly move around within that matrix, and leaders need to adjust the way they approach those people and lead those people. Um, and so the way you get results, the way you help people excel at work when they're going through these emotional times, these struggles, these changes, is think about it as getting these circles to overlap. And the
Okay.
more these circles overlap, the greater the results and the more effective you will be, right? And while we could talk about all eight of the things that are listed there, eight of those steps, they're all important, but four of them are more important than the rest. And there we refer to them as the leadership golden circle.
Okay. And before you move on to that,
Yep.
Anthony, because I mean, that last slide, there's so much there, and
Right.
you're right, we can't get to it all. But I'm sure you've seen in your experience, I have these conversations all the time, and employees, some of them are fearful. They're
Hmm.
fearful if they bring up this, the emotional things that they're going through.
Right.
What if they lose their job? What if they're held back from a promotion? What if, all the what ifs that
Right.
could happen, and then that that's not helpful. And so coming from obviously coming from the top, from the
Right.
leadership side is so important. And it it can be challenging to instill that change in mindset, right, Anthony?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will tell you in our research, every single person we talked to, regardless of what the struggle was, right?
Mhm.
Whether it was change management, whether it was the loss of a loved one, or it was a house that burned down, or Hurricane Katrina, or whatever, right? Um, every single person we talked to ended their story in the same way. And the sentence they used were two sides of the same coin, right? They either said, I was so thankful I was able to talk about this at work because it made it so much easier to get through it, uh, both outside of work and the fact that I was trying to navigate all these emotions at work and be productive and not get fired. And boy, it just made it so much easier for me to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
Or they said, I wish I had been able to talk about this at work
Uh,
because it would have made it so much easier for me to succeed.
that's huge.
Yeah, every single person. That's how every story ended, was with one of those two sentences. Right?
Wow.
And the way you get there is through this leadership golden circle, right?
Tell
It's
us about it.
I will do that. I will do that. So the very first one is leadership competence.
Okay.
Um, and there are, and by the way, so I need to preface this. We didn't make this up, right? I would encourage people to go out and Google on YouTube. You can search on YouTube, Colonel Arthur Athens,
Hmm.
and the
Okay.
name of the talk is What's Love Got to Do with It? And
Great.
there's a 14-minute clip. And I happen to have the privilege of being present in two of his presentations. So Colonel Athens is a retired U.S. Marine colonel who now
Mhm.
teaches he teaches at leadership at the U.S. Naval Academy. And that talk was to a capstone graduation class that was getting ready to graduate. And he was explaining to them that even in the military, you got to love your people. And he actually talks about the three C's of leadership. We've added a fourth one. So this is really based on things that I learned from him, but that I have seen put in place and have worked for people who have demonstrated this, and I have worked for people who have not. And I can tell you, the people who demonstrated this, those teams moved mountains for those people and did things that others said were not possible. And the ones who did not demonstrate it had high turnover, lack of engagement, lack of trust, right? The list just goes on and on. People were burned out. They always had openings in their department, right? It just goes on and on. So let me quickly cover these. Leadership competence. The question that people are looking for everyone in the organization to answer, especially the leader, is, does this leader know their role, or are they working really hard to learn it? Right.
Okay.
And so people will give you a lot of leeway. When I stepped into that presidency role, I did not know anything about the industry. I did not know anything about the company. I did not know anything about the products. I was ignorant, right? But people could see that I was working my tail off to learn it. I visited the top 10 customers. I visited the top 10 suppliers. I visited the top 10 agents. I visited, if there was a list of top 10, I was traveling to go see them, right? I was talking to everybody, right? And I was asking them the same questions. Who are we? What do we really do here? And why does it matter? Right?
Okay.
And so they gave me lots of leeway. They were like, yep, you know what? He gets it. He's
Hmm.
ignorant, but he understands he's ignorant and he's working to fix that. And so we'll give him lots of time to do that. Now, I will contrast that. When I was in HR, director of HR, I supported a gentleman who was put into the manufacturing leadership role to round him out because we thought he was a high potential and he was going to go run a business for us one day. And so we took him out of the vice president of strategy job and we put him in the vice president of manufacturing role. And his very first teleconference with his plant managers, he started, this was the first 30 seconds. Glad everybody's on the line. Just want everybody to know I'm only here to check the boxes. So as long as you understand that and I understand that, we'll be good. So let's just keep the thing running and then I'm going to move on. That
Wow.
is how he started the conversation. We fired him 7 months later,
Yeah.
right? Huge, huge difference. So leadership competence, leadership courage, the question that everyone is looking for the leader to answer with leadership courage is, will this person make the tough decision to do what's right, even if that decision brings negative consequences to themselves or to the organization? That's what people want from the leader. And the leader who demonstrates that will get lots and lots and lots of trust, right? And yeah, sometimes you got to go to the board or you got to go to the CEO and say, you're not going to like this news, but here's what we're doing, right?
Right.
But that's what people are looking for. Leadership compassion. Leadership compassion, the question that everybody's looking for the leader to answer is, does this leader care as much about me as he does himself?
Mm.
Right? And if you do, I'm in. If not, doesn't matter what else is on this slide. You can talk to me all you want about learning opportunities and how we treat you with dignity and respect and how great our company's mission and purpose is and all of that kind of stuff. If you actually give me the impression that you don't care about me, all you care about is next quarter's numbers and whether or not you're going to get a bonus. And right, if the first place we go when things get tough, if you start eliminating people, I, it doesn't line up for me, right? It doesn't line up for me. And so I'm going to check out, right?
And
And
there's such a huge tie, right? I mean, here we are, compassion and all of the emotional turmoil that happens in life-changing events, work-changing events.
absolutely,
Oh my God.
absolutely, right? And then, and well, so I'll cover the last one and then I'll give you one more tidbit on this. So then the last one is vulnerability, leadership vulnerability. So I could care about you, but if I myself am not willing to raise my hand and say, I don't get this, or hey, I'm really struggling with this, or um, I don't know where we're going, but hey, we'll figure it out together, right? I'm open to suggestions. Let's talk about it, right? That that speaks more than anything else, right? And so what people are looking for the leader to answer is this leader as open and honest and candid as he's expecting me to be? And if he's not, I ain't raising my hand, right?
That's
I'm not raising my hand. And
employees can
so
see right through it if you're not being
absolutely,
honest and
absolutely,
absolutely.
absolutely. And and it's interesting um, when leaders demonstrate all of these, how the organization will actually rally around them, right? The organization actually gets stronger, right? Even though some of these things sound like weakness, the team, the organization actually gets stronger and more resilient on an individual level and an organizational level, and their capacity for change goes up, right? And it's because they know they can depend on one another. And if they're struggling, they can go in and talk to the leader, and he's actually going to pay attention and he's going to listen or she's going to listen, right? They are going to listen, right? And they're going to work through it, and it's okay. And they're not going to go, it sucks to be you. Now let's go back to work because you have production numbers you have to hit, right? They're going to be like, hey, Jody, tell me what we can do right now to make this better for you. What do you need? Right?
Oh gosh. And if I mean you covered so much, but if leaders could ask that question, what do
Mhm.
you need? How can I support you?
Right.
That doesn't happen as often as it should.
It does not. It does not. And one of the mistakes that people make is they think they have to solve the problem for you.
Yeah.
So they don't ask you what you need. They come in and say, "So here's what we're going to do, Jody. We're going to remove you from this, that, and the other thing, and we're going to give you time, and we're going to take people away from you so you're not stressed." And Jody's thinking, "Actually, that's not what I want to do. Actually, I'd be okay if you would just let me have the flexibility to come and go as I need to get certain things done. I think I can manage all of this, right?" Or Jody, right? Or they're saying, "Hey, you know, our bereavement policy says you could take 60 days off, take 60 days off." And Jody's thinking, this was a real life example. I had a client who called me. It was a trucking company, and the president of the company called me and said, "Hey, uh, we have a father and a son that both drive for us. And over the weekend, the son committed suicide in the father's house and died in the father's arms. How do we know? What do we do? Like, how do we talk to this guy? What do we do? And how do we know when he's ready to come back to work? Like, do we tell him stay home? What do we do?" And
Yeah.
my response to them, so number one, they put everybody that would come in contact with this individual through our grief training. Tragedy is struck, now what? Training. Um, and my counsel to him was, well, talk to him. Don't assume anything, right? Talk to him. Be like, "Hey, what do you need? If you need time off, you got it. We get it. Take as much time as you need, right?
Right.
And then don't just leave him alone, right? Check on him. How you doing? Are you doing okay? Is there anything else you need from us?" I said, and at some point, he's going to tell you, right? And like after like 10 days, the guy said, "I cannot sit in this house any longer.
Mm.
I can't. All the memories are here. I'm not ready to go out overnight yet. But boy, if I could come back to work and drive local, I think that would help me a lot." And so they adjusted schedules, moved some people around, put him back on the road locally, and helped him excel at work through his grief simply by supporting them and caring about him, truly caring, not just showing up at the funeral, saying, "Hey, if you need anything, call me." Oh, and our policy, by the way, is you only get 3 days off for, your son. So I guess we'll see you back on work on Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And having that compassion and that flexibility, that's a beautiful story of how this played out in the company. And so often too, when I talk to businesses, they're like, we're good. We've got a bereavement policy, we've got a couple EAP visits, we're good.
right,
Well, it really goes beyond that to what you just demonstrated, Anthony, to be
right,
able to have managers and frontline supporters know what to say and not get that call and go, "I'm sorry," exactly what you said. "We'll see you on Friday. You've only
right,
got 3 days off."
right. Or your company's done all this work around bereavement policies and EAP support and all those kinds of things, but the person's manager calls them every third day and is like, "Hey, so when are you thinking about coming back?" Well,
Right.
it's all meaningless, right? And I will tell you the same thing plays out during change management, right? Same thing plays out during change management. What do you have to be upset about? You got to keep your job. Well, yeah, but it's not the same job. And actually, my job got harder, not easier. I can't tell you how many medical facilities I've been in where they've put in a new system and the nurses are like, "This is crazy. This is crazy. I have to do things twice now," right? But somebody sold them on this system and there were supposed to be all these time-saving benefits. And so now we expect you to pick up 10% more patient load. But the reality is the person on the ground is actually doing things twice now. In fact, now she's doing it manually once to go back and put it in the system because the things that she really needs to do her job are not really there. It's crazy. And nobody's right. No, and all people are doing is holding her accountable to the metrics and then managing her performance when she's not hitting the change management goals, right? The new productivity goals, which just compounds the problem. So
Ab- And that's for
sorry, bit of a
everyone.
soapbox there.
No, I appreciate that because that's another great example because technology changes happen frequently
Yep,
within companies, and
yep,
sometimes managers can say, well, this is better. It's more, I don't know, it's going to allow us to do this more effectively and efficiently, and all that might sound great, but think about the people that have to implement it and the
right,
change it
right,
takes to do that, because all that may be very, very true,
right,
uh, but being mindful
right,
of what those folks are going through.
right,
All right, Anthony, I could keep talking to you forever because we could dig into this.
right,
There's
right,
so much to cover. So
right.
if you could summarize like one thing that you want leaders, everyone who's listening today to take away from our conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So the one thing is leadership is the only thing that matters. You can't policy your way, you can't benefit your way, you can't administrate your way, you can't edict your way, you can't demand your way, you can't measure your way through this. It's leadership. It's leadership. And most of the time people and let me break that down. It's leadership, but specifically it's emotional and leadership health, right? That's what you need, right? Harvard Business did a study that said 70%, 75% of all change initiatives fail to deliver the results at some level. McKinsey followed that up and found that the number one reason that change initiatives fail in organizations is because of human and cultural issues.
Mm,
The human issues are the emotional side. It's the seven struggles. It's what we've been talking about. The cultural side is leadership. That's what causes these change initiatives to fail. That's what causes employees to spiral down during times of grief, is because people aren't helping them through the emotional side and the cultural side, right? Of not being able to talk about, I can't get emotional at work, right? Oh my gosh, if my supervisor sees me cry, they'll fire me. Well, no, actually, maybe the best thing that can happen is for your supervisor to sit down and chat with you. And if you cry, that may be a great thing, right?
mm.
Because you'll only cry if you need to cry, right? And so you got to be willing to go there. So that would be the one thing. Leadership, plain and simple, work this model.
Thank you, Anthony. And so how can everybody reach you if, because I'm sure they're going to want to find out more about
Yeah,
your book, which I
yeah,
know you're going to share.
yeah,
And I believe you have a health assessment too. So tell us a
yeah,
little
yeah,
bit
yeah.
about
So
that.
two things. Number one, we actually have an assessment, and I know a lot of organizations do engagement surveys, but this assessment is actually targeted at emotional and leadership health. And we've had to go through some reprogramming due to a tragedy, right? So the person who was handling our information technology suddenly died, and he took with him like everything. So we had to rework this. So I'm looking for folks to just log in. There's no commitment. I'm not going to call you back. I'm not going to email you. We're not going to solicit you. But I would like to beta test our new programming. And you will, in return, get a report that shows you your results. And you can take it based on however you think people in your organization would answer the questions. So that's number one. And then number two, you asked about the book and how to get a hold of me. The book is The Dying Art of Leadership. Uh, and you can scan the codes for BookBaby or Amazon. And then you can see our website and my email address and my LinkedIn profile to connect with me. So,
Wonderful.
and I hope people will do that.
Absolutely. Anthony, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom today with everyone. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Well, I really appreciate it, Jody. Would love to continue the conversations if need be. Wisdom might be too strong a word, but hopefully it was informative for folks. So
Absolutely. Thanks, Anthony.
you bet. Thanks for having me as a guest.
Sure. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.